jet black eyes. The story I am about to tell you is a true story that my mother experienced when she was still young. Or, let's say it seems to be a true story. It is so far removed from reality that I have never told it to anyone. I don't think anyone would believe me if I told them. My mother worked as a nurse for her brother, a medical practitioner, when she was young. So when I say nurse in my story, please think of my mother, and when I say doctor, please think of my mother's own brother. Doctors at that time did not have a clear division of roles as they do today, and they did not refuse anyone who came to them. They treated everything from patients with skin diseases to pregnant and nursing mothers. One evening, a girl with a serious head injury was brought to the clinic. The father of the girl was the one who brought her in, and he was in a half-crazy state. The doctor thought at first glance that the girl would not survive, but he did everything he could. However, the child still could not be saved. The father clung to his daughter's corpse and sobbed. The nurses just cringed. It was so pathetic that she could not even ask him why he was injured. Both the doctor and the nurse knew the father and the child. No, it was the doctor who had taken the daughter out of her mother's womb. The nurse looked at the crying father in dismay and thought of the parent and child who had always held hands. The father and son were members of a tribe that was hated by the townspeople as Inugamisyusi. It is unthinkable today, but everyone from that village, which was the target of discrimination, was considered to be possessed by the Inugami, and was avoided by the townspeople. The doctor was a greedy man by nature and did not accept any money from the poor. However, he did not give free medical examinations. He would simply say, "Please give me some rice in the fall, or I'm looking forward to your delicious meat." Once, when the clinic was about to catch fire, they rushed to the scene before the fire brigade, and it was only a fire that broke out. Suddenly, the father, who had been sobbing, stands up. "I'll never forgive you, doctor. I'll kill you all." He shouted and ran out of the clinic, leaving his daughter's corpse behind. The doctor, who thought it was simply an accident, thought, "Oh no," and immediately went after him. The nurse also went outside and wanted to stop the father at all costs, but as expected, she could not leave the body there and decided to wait for the doctor. The doctor came back alone. He searched frantically for the body, but in the end he couldn't find it. The teacher had no choice but to call the police. However, even if it was true that he had gone to kill her, the police had no way to prevent it if they did not know who he had gone to kill. When she was brought to the clinic, her daughter still had a pulse. If there was a moment when she was even slightly conscious and able to express her thoughts, the only one who knew was her father. The police, teachers, nurses, and schoolteachers split up and went door to door asking about her. "Does anyone in the family have any knowledge of your daughter's death?" The answer was no. The answer was no, in every house. The funeral for the daughter was paid for by the teacher, and she was buried in the grave where her mother lies. Ikiru's hope that her father would show up during the funeral or at some other time did not come true. Her mother had died of a cold about a year after giving birth to her daughter. The doctor had beaten her father once. The reason was that he had not told Ikiru that his wife was ill. "I couldn't tell him because he didn't pay me when I delivered the baby or when my daughter had a fever." As the father spoke with tears streaming down his face, the teacher punched him as hard as he could. "I told you I didn't need the money." Both the doctor and the nurse hugged and cried with the father until their tears ran dry. Even the daughter, who was supposed to be sleeping peacefully beside him, joined the three of them. At that moment, the nurse thought from the bottom of her heart, "It's not true that the dogs are possessed by the gods. They are all good people." A month passes without anything happening. The disappearance of the father is no longer a topic of conversation. Then one day, a call came into the clinic from a family. The doctor and the nurse rushed to the hospital. When the doctor rushed to the hospital with a nurse, the boy was already not breathing. As they attempted to perform cardiac massage, they touched the child's body, which had collapsed with wide eyes, and noticed something was wrong. Rigor mortis had already begun. The doctor and nurse lost their voices. His face is turning earthy brown in a flash. Impossible. The doctor was even more surprised when he took off the child's clothes. The child's body, emaciated and with floating ribs, was so dry and lifeless that it was hard to believe that he had just died. The teacher flips the child's body over. Everyone there froze. There was a purple bruise on his back. Everyone didn't say it, but it looked like letters. My mother said. It was a beauty, no matter how you look at it. My dead daughter's name was Mayoko, so I was horrified. From time to time, a voice that could only be described as a roar would echo from the back room. It was the grandmother of the eldest son who had died, sobbing. The nurse looked at the child's father. He has been mumbling something to himself since a while ago. I couldn't hear what he was saying at all. The mother sitting by her side is no longer in a state of abandonment. Her eyes are unfocused. Suddenly, the father shouted so loudly that the house shook. He did not understand what he was saying. Then he fell to the side in a sitting position. The doctor ran to his father and yelled something. The nurse knew that the doctor was calling her at that moment, but she could not hear what he was saying at all and did not move her body, just looking at the doctor's mouth, which was cracking up. Suddenly, he casually looked at the dead body lying beside him. Something was coming out of his back. It was something like black smoke, or rather, something more textured than smoke, like black cotton candy. It slipped out of his back and slowly floated up and stopped right in front of the nurse. She could not see out of it. Silence enveloped her, as if her eardrums had been ruptured. The dismay of the surroundings that came into view seemed like something else. What had looked like black cotton candy had somehow turned into a deep darkness. I suddenly felt a gaze in the middle of it and stared at her. Two eyes were staring at her. Two eyes that were simply black, floating in the jet black darkness. Strangely, she was not afraid. Suddenly, she felt an inexpressible sorrow welling up inside her. The feeling intensified rapidly and could not be suppressed. Something popped inside her. My mother said. The next thing I knew, they were laying me down in the next room. My brother was peering at me worriedly. Later my brother told me that she suddenly went crazy and started crying, that she passed out after crying and screaming a lot. The father of the deceased child later regained consciousness but had a mental breakdown and was sent to a mental hospital that day. The oldest son had a 3-year-old brother who died suddenly of an unexplained heart attack a week later. The next day, the mother committed suicide by hanging herself. Within 10 days of the eldest son's death, the only person left in the house was the grandmother. The doctor and nurse were curious about the family's relationship with the daughter, but there was no way they could ask. The doctor was concerned about the grandmother, who was left alone in the house, and went to check on her frequently. The grandmother was very stout. I heard that she said, "When I die, who will visit my grave?" However, about 3 months after her eldest son's death, the grandmother drowned herself in the river that runs through the center of the town and passed away. The grandmother had left a suicide note addressed to the doctor. The doctor and nurses were speechless at the contents. "Doctor, I am very sorry for the trouble I have caused you. I will never forget your many words of encouragement. I want to go to the other world as soon as possible, meet the family no matter what it takes, and apologize on my knees. I am the one who killed my daughter, and I am responsible for everything. You probably don't know this, but my daughter and my grandson were very close. They were always together when they went to the mountains or played in the river. My son always looked at them with disgust. Of all the people to play with, she's the one. My son always said. I cannot blame my son. It was I, of all people, who told my son about that village. I can't regret it now, But it was me who told my son not to play with the children of that village. In fact, on the day my daughter died, her father came to our house once. He said, "Have you seen my daughter? She hasn't come home yet." I called my son and asked him. Words cannot quite describe the shock I received immediately after that. My son said to me with a blank expression on his face, "I'd have thrown your daughter off a bridge." "What are you talking about? Are you sleepwalking?" I asked him, as if I was desperate for answers, but he answered without hesitation. He said, "Because, my daughter, your father told me that you are a monster and not a human being." I felt dizzy. It had to be a dream, I thought with all my heart. My father was gone before I knew it. My son was supposed to be a gentle child. I had turned him into an ogre. Maybe I should have turned myself in immediately. But I still could not bear to turn my lovely grandson into a murderer. "The doctor came to inform you of her death, didn't he? And the father's condition at that time?" I was ready to go. I hid my son, daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren behind the ceiling and decided to wait for his father. When I instructed my son to do so, he said to me, "There is no need to hide. There is no need to hide. On the contrary, I will kill you myself." I was pathetic. Who is more of a dog and beast, my daughter's father or my son? I slapped my son in the face for the first time. As I have said before, I have no right to blame my son. I was pathetic, and so was I. I sat in the living room and waited patiently for his father. First and foremost, I had to meet with him and apologize for my mistake. At midnight, he did come. He had nothing in his hand that looked like a weapon. "I take full responsibility for everything. Please forgive me." I put the knife in my hand to my neck. But he didn't seem to care about my appearance. He just wandered around the room and left the house. When I think about it, there is no way he would have forgiven me if I had died. I do not hold any grudge against him at all. If our positions had been reversed, I would have become an ogre or a monster. Now I want to hug her who has passed away more than I want to think about my grandchildren. My tears have already dried up. This is what she wrote in her will. Later, as if waiting for the grandmother to pass away, the body of the father of the first girl who had died was found in the mountains. He was rotting under a large tree. After examining his stomach and intestines, the cause of death was diagnosed as probably starvation. The large tree had several nails driven into it. Until it was impossible to tell that it was a picture of that family. When my mother shared this story with me, she said at the end, "Curses really do exist." This is the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end.